Beyond the Bright Sea, Chapter 25. The next morning, as Osh and I worked dried seaweed into our garden, Miss Maggie appeared by the bath stands. "Your letter came," she called as she crossed the mid-tide channel, her skirts held high in one hand, her shoes in a white envelope in the other. "From the Pennakees nurse, Miss Morgan." "We're almost done here," Osh said, so I worked on, faster than before, while Miss Maggie found a seat on the rocks and spread her skirts to dry. "Oh, for the love of Pete," she said after a bit. "That seaweed's not going to run off if you stop for just a minute, Daniel." But he didn't stop until we'd tucked every last shred of seaweed underground where it could do its work. As soon as we were done, Mouse crept out of the grasses and attacked a small hole in the soil, dragging out a strand of sea lettuce so she could properly subdue it. But the sea lettuce did not put up much of a fight, and after a moment Mouse decided to attack Osh's bootlaces instead, rolling in the dirt until he lifted her up and tossed her gently aside. I leaned my hoe against the rocks and went to sit with Miss Maggie. Osh stayed where he was. She handed me the letter and watched as I opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the paper inside. I read it aloud to them both. "Dear Crow," it began, "I hope you can forgive me for being cautious. You sound like an honest person looking for answers, but I have learned that not everything is as it seems, and not everyone can be trusted." I made a face at Miss Maggie. "What's she talking about?" "Keep reading," she said. "When Dr. Eastman showed me your first letter, I wanted to take the next train north to see you for myself. How else could I know for sure who had written that letter? And how can I know who wrote the second letter, the one that came to me directly, with that mysterious list of words?" I remembered writing that letter, not trusting the nurse enough, afraid to spell out what I wanted to know. And now here she was, likewise suspicious. "It may seem odd," I read, "to be so careful, but I have reasons. The main one, a man I met here in Louisiana, a workman who had come to repair the roof on the hospital, Mr. Kendall, Mr. James Kendall. One day he asked me about a necklace I was wearing, asked me if it was real gold, a real ruby in the pendant. He was charming about it, said that it was very pretty, but not nearly as pretty as I was. I was flattered, I admit it. I am not and never have been pretty, but it was nice to think that I was. And I told him, yes, the necklace was made from real gold, a real ruby. I told him that it had been a gift from my friend Susanna, a patient I'd treated on Pennakees Island, at the leper colony there. I expected him to go back away, like everyone else did, but he didn't. And when I explained that she had found it while digging for root, which we used on open sores, he seemed quite interested. He asked me if I would like to have dinner with him sometime, and I said yes. We went out together just a day later. It was so nice for someone to be unafraid of me. Most everyone else kept me at arm's length, but not him. And here I stopped again, this time to consider what I hadn't realized before, that the people who cared for lepers took more than one kind of risk. "Crow?" Miss Maggie said, and I returned to the letter. "And Mr. Kendall listened to me," I read. "No one had ever listened to me the way he listened to me. He asked me a lot of questions about Pennakees and the leper colony and my friend Susanna. I told him, and I'm telling you now, that although she'd been savaged by her awful disease, she was a beautiful woman, kind, sweet, so smart. I told him all about her and our friendship, how brave she was, how hard she worked to help the other patients, no matter how much she herself was ailing. And I answered his questions about life on that island. I thought he was my friend. But soon after that, the necklace went missing from my room at the hospital, and the man disappeared too. What a fool I was. I can't be sure that he took it. I also can't be sure that you aren't that man, writing to see if I know anything more about all this. In fact, I do know more, but I won't put it into a letter. If you are, indeed, that terrible man, then shame on you. If not, these words I have written in response to the ones you sent me should mean quite a lot. I hope so. On the second page, Nurse Evelyn had written my list of words, and next to each one of them, something of her own. I held the page out so Miss Maggie could see it too, but I read it aloud for Osh to hear. Baby, I had written. You, she had replied. For Skiff, she had written, it was an old one that no one missed for weeks, and then I told Dr. Eastman that it had drifted away on the tide. Next to ring, a line that made my heart hurt. Susanna wore this. And then, something more mysterious. It is your inheritance. I think there may be more. What's an inheritance? I asked Miss Maggie. It's what someone leaves behind when she dies, she said. A gift. For Little Feather, Nurse Evelyn had written, the mark by which I would know that you are hers. And for Lambs, another way you'll know what she wanted you to know. And finally, Bright Sea. My name, she had written, Morgan, which is Celtic like me. It means bright sea. And your mother gave it to you too, which was also her gift to me, better than the necklace. After that, Nurse Evelyn had written, someday I hope to take that train north to look for you. And she had signed it, Evelyn Morgan. But below that was a postscript, and it too helped answer a question I'd been asking myself. If you are who I think you are, she wrote, I hope you will forgive me if I've made mistakes. Not long after you were born, someone sent a letter to Pennickys asking questions about a baby who had washed up on one of the Elizabeths. I fetched the mail that day. The letter wasn't addressed to anyone in particular, just the hospital. So I opened it, and I burned it. Susanna and your father had chosen to give you a chance at something other than Pennickys or an orphanage, and that letter meant you had arrived safely in a better place. That was all Susanna wanted, so that's what I gave her. I folded up the letter and tucked it back inside the envelope. Susanna was my mother, I said. Miss Maggie nodded. She was. And now I know for sure that I do have a brother, whether he's that sailor or not. Yes, you do, she said. And Elvin is my father, I said, or was. At which Osh pushed aside his hoe and went into the house. Miss Maggie followed him, and I followed her, Mouse at my heels.